Hey everybody, how you doing? It's Dean Jenkins here. So for this week's installment of Difficult Conversations, what I decided to do was take a question that somebody that's been following the project from the beginning asked and throw it out there to a bunch of different police officers from all over the country. So that's going to do a couple different things. The first thing it's going to do is going to stimulate conversation, which is what we've been trying to do all along. And the second thing it's going to do is it's going to answer a couple age-old questions of A, do all police officers think the same? And B, are all police officers trained the same? So stay tuned, you're not going to want to miss this. Let them know.
Hashtag supply the why.
How you doing? My name is Dale Peters, and I'm an active duty police officer out here in Southern California. I am also the host of the Black and Blue podcast. Be sure you check that out at blackandblue.us. But the question at hand today is about the taser. Why is it termed as a lethal weapon in one state and not in another? I would say that's basically a legislation and training issue. Out here in California where I am, we get some really good top-notch training. I would assume other jurisdictions do as well, but I can only speak on California. And out here, we don't term the taser as a lethal weapon. We term it as a less than lethal weapon. And what that means is, ordinarily we wouldn't use a taser in a deadly force situation, but it can be used if the situation calls for it. It can be used in a lethal situation. Ordinarily it's used, in a situation to possibly, stop a combative subject or something of that nature. But it can be used in a lethal situation if the situation calls for it.
My name is Obed Magny, and I'm a police officer out here in California. And the question is, why is the taser considered a deadly weapon in one jurisdiction, and in another jurisdiction, it's not considered a deadly weapon? So obviously, there's some legal issues in the definition of deadly versus not deadly. So there's the first problem. There's no consistency across the board. But I'm going to do my best to try to explain this. So in one jurisdiction, using the taser, like for example out here in California, it's considered a less than lethal weapon. So when you're hit with the taser, like I have when I was in the academy, everyone had to go through that experience to, see what it feels like and all that good stuff. So when I'm hit with the taser, I'm incapacitated. It's kind of like putting that 9-volt battery on your tongue, and you just kind of have that discomfort for like 5 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds. So in that aspect, it's not meant to kill you, but it is meant to hurt and make you very uncomfortable for a short period amount of time so that officers can take, people into custody in that aspect. So whether it's me being hit with the taser or somebody being hit with the taser, the act itself is not considered deadly. So that's how one jurisdiction will define that. And again, I'm oversimplifying it for the purpose of this video. In another jurisdiction, they may use the fact that because you are incapacitated and you are defenseless, it could be deadly in that sense. So if I'm hit with a taser, somebody could take my gun from me. I can't protect myself.
And the easy answer to that is that's left up to the individual states. Laws are devised by legislators in state houses across the country, and police departments actually have very little input in those types of things.
As we all know, laws are different across all 50 states. But with that said, I think there's quite a few objects that can be used in a deadly weapon that may not be the intended purpose. For example, a pen. A pen can be used as a deadly weapon if I jab it into your eye, and it could cause serious bodily harm or even death. The courts have already said that a taser is designed to inflict seriously bodily pain and should only be used in serious use of force incidents. With that said, officers are trained to use the taser. They've been through the training. They know where to aim it. They know to avoid the heart, to aim lower center mass. A taser in the wrong hands is absolutely a deadly weapon. Somebody doesn't know how to use it. Somebody who, shoots the probes into the heart or continues to pull the trigger, they don't realize that they're continually tasing somebody, could absolutely be used in a deadly manner.
To me, a taser itself is not a deadly weapon. It's what could happen to a person after they're tased that would make it a deadly weapon. So for instance, you're incapacitated by being tased as an officer, and then someone's able to get your firearm and shoot you with it. So that's why I think it could be a potentially deadly weapon, but by definition, it's a less lethal weapon.
I honestly wasn't even aware that tasers were considered deadly weapons by definition in other states until the Rashad Brooks case recently in Atlanta. But when you think about that, when you think about what the capabilities of a taser can do, is even in our training, we're taught that in some instances, a taser can cause death or serious bodily injury, especially if someone has an underlying condition or a cardiac condition. So I think that there should be some standardization as to whether it's defined as a deadly weapon or not. One of the things I do believe, though, is that if an officer is faced with being tased in the course of their official duty, that that has to be looked at as a potential lethal threat to that officer. If the officer becomes incapacitated and he or she's weapon is taken from them and used against them, I think that's a potential. But I think that the states, each individual state needs to have some sort of a defined definition so that officers on the street have a clear understanding and clear guidance as to what their capabilities are for defending themselves or the general public should they are faced with the use of a taser against them or somebody else. Question 2, do you think there should be standard guidelines for deadly force? I absolutely do. I think that the standardization of policies and procedures and guidelines, especially through organizations such as CALEA, are crucial to organizational transparency to the public that they serve, and policing ourselves and holding ourselves accountable is crucial to that message that we want to send to the community. I think for deadly force, obviously guidelines should be standardized, but those of us in law enforcement know that each instance of deadly force has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis based on what actually transpired, based on the evidence in the case, and one of the factors is the officer's perceived threat at the time of the deadly force incident. But certainly standardized guidelines, I think, are crucial so that officers have a clear understanding as to what their capabilities are as they conduct their duties and if they are faced with some type of a deadly force situation.
Do I think there should be standardized guidelines across the country? Absolutely. That would put a halt to some of these ambiguities that arise from one state to another. We got a situation out in Georgia of, is it a lethal weapon or not? If we had standardized principles and guidelines, that would put an end to that, and I would take that out of the DA's hands, and it would put it squarely on the policies and principles that some standardized board put forth. I hope I answered your question about the taser. Feel free to contact me at any time if you have any other questions or concerns. Thank you.
Because of the inconsistencies across the board, there's a lot of confusion. And I'm not even saying that my definition is the end-all be-all, but I think that's where some of the hang-up is. So there has to be a national standard where it's consistent across the board, because that would alleviate a lot of the issues as far as why officers are doing something in one department while the department next door is not doing that. So hopefully that helps.
And should there be a standardization across the board as it relates to use of force? It's a popular question right now, and it's something that it can't really be wrapped up in a small video, but my short answer is yes. I think it's time that there is a standardization across the board. We do have to take into consideration various departments of various sizes. In my department, we have about 60 people, and backup is only a few minutes away typically. In jurisdictions where backup is 45 minutes to an hour away, those things have to be taken into consideration. I think most states feel that their use of force is on par with what is reasonable. So it's going to take a long time, but I do feel that if we do have some sort of standardization across the board, because we have the same standard guidelines as it relates to case law, as in Graham versus Connor, that covers the entire United States police officers. So to have a standard use of force guideline, I think would be helpful to us going forward.
Yes, but we already have a standard guideline with Graham versus Connor, objectively reasonable standard, which is based off a three-pronged test: the severity of the crime at issue, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of officers or others, or whether the subject is actively resisting arrest. The use of force that you're using against your attacker has to be objectively reasonable. If a subject steals your taser off your belt, they now have access to your weapon if you get tased. So that is absolutely deadly force, in my opinion. And we already have case law deciding that with the objectively reasonable standard case in Graham versus Connor. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Sure, I think there should be standard guidelines. I think, it's a less lethal weapon, like I said, by definition, and I think that is the standard guideline. I just think how it's used is what makes the difference. So to say there's standard guidelines, I think would be too much of a reach. I think it's impossible to plan for every scenario related to a less lethal weapon. And how do I think that would help with case outcomes? I think each case should be treated on a case-by-case basis, because there's always specific things that happen within certain cases that are unique to it. So to say that because a taser was deemed a deadly weapon in Atlanta does not mean it should be a deadly weapon necessarily in Massachusetts if it wasn't used in a certain manner.
All right, the first question is, why is a taser considered a deadly weapon in one state and not in another? And that's pretty simply answered. The Constitution allows for each state to basically have the freedom to make any law more strict than the federal law. So you can't make a law that's more lax than the federal law, but you can make one that's a little stricter. So each state has the ability to do that, and that's why the taser is considered a deadly weapon in a place like Georgia and not a place like where I work, Massachusetts, or even in New Hampshire, where I also worked. All right, the next question is, do I think there should be standard guidelines across the country as far as use of force? And very simply put, absolutely. And the reason why that's so important, it's not even for the simplicity for police officers, it's really for the simplicity of you, the citizens. Because one of the things that makes it so difficult to debate these cases, what's a good use of force, what's not a good use of force, is every state is a little different as to how they define what force, what level of force a given action is, and then what the balanced response is for that force. So if we had a standardized system for all police officers across the United States, it would make it easier to explain some of these cases, and it would also make it easier for the public to buy in when police officers from one state say they did a good use of force, and then maybe people from another state think, well, that's not really how we do things here. So standardization is key, and I think that's something that should be considered for sure. All right, the final question is, if there was standardization across the board, would it help with case outcomes? And the simple answer is yes, because it's just like anything else. Any decision that you make at home, any decision that I make, if I'm going to buy a couch, if I know that the price is the same at every furniture store, it's going to be that much easier for me to make a decision than it is if I have to shop around at each different store and kind of figure out how each store prices their furniture. So it's a crude example, I know, but the short answer is yes. I think it would help with having more standard outcomes with these cases, and you wouldn't see like the large variations between state to state, because there would be one standard for the entire country, and it would make it easier for the sentences or for people getting off. It would make it easier to understand those verdicts and make it standard across the country. So, all right, everybody. I hope you'd enjoyed seeing some of the different comments from some of the police officers that were kind enough to send in their videos and share their views with everybody. So now we've talked about the taser. So let's take a look and see what it looks like when you actually get hit with a taser. So I'm going to leave you with that. Enjoy the rest of the video. and I'll see you next time. Hashtag supply the why.
Oh my God, Kelly Clarkson! Oh, that was like 8 hours. Holy shit!
You're screaming. Sounds like
No, I didn't.
You screamed a little bit.
I did.
Great questions, Emil. Thanks for supporting me from the beginning. And please keep submitting these great questions. All right, thanks.